Housing and insurance will come to order. Today's hearing is entitled The Impact of Autonomous Vehicles on the Future of Insurance. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the Chair for inclusion in the record. Without objection, members of the full committee who are not members of this subcommittee may participate in today's hearing for the purpose of making an opening statement and asking our witnesses questions. The Chair now recognizes himself for a 5-minute opening statement. I first want to thank our panel for being here today. Apologize that we were late. We had a vote on the floor, and it takes a while to get people back to the hearing room, but we're grateful for your presence and excited to hear your testimony on autonomous vehicles as it has a cross-section with insurance. So again, thank you for being here. Now, while this focus of today's hearing will be on insurance, other committees have already been looking at the issue, and I suspect Judiciary may look at AVs from a product liability perspective as opposed to our insurance perspective. Reality is catching up with movies like Blade Runner, Demolition Man, Minority Report. We are seeing the capabilities of fully autonomous vehicles being tested in cities like San Francisco, Miami, Pittsburgh, and more. Auto insurance policies have already been impacted by AVs. For instance, we already have level 2 and level 3 AVs on the road, wherein vehicles assist the driver in accelerating, decelerating, and steering. Manufacturers like Tesla are already employing adaptive cruise control technology, which lets you take your hands off the wheel for a lengthened period of time. There are a lot of people out there that are somewhat resistant to entrusting their lives with autonomous vehicles. And there's others who just want to drive. The freedom of shifting gears and being behind the wheel, it's kind of American. There's a freedom to it. They want to keep that. But at the end of the day, safety will be the top concern before the public is ready to fully trust AVs. We have seen the reaction from both industry and the public to recent accidents and how it has altered views on how ready this technology is from and for being deployed. There are others ready for the change. Senior citizens are the perfect demographic for AVs. The oldest among us are clamoring for this new technology. They don't want to drive any more than we want to be behind a Cadillac going 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. If you talk to millennials, their generation, they don't even own cars. They like public transportation. They think of Uber and Lyft also as public transportation. And in my DC office here, I only have 2 staff members that have cars, and they're not millennials. They're older. At the corporate level, Uber SUVs and Uber Black are how executives get around town. These ride-sharing companies are also looking at employing fleets of fully autonomous vehicles. I have 8 kids. I have gone through the pain of teaching 2 of them how to drive. I think I got a lot of gray hair from that process. So not only do you notice the increased cost of insurance, especially after your daughter backs into your campaign staffer's car, but also the stress of your kids getting in an accident. What does this technology do to keep our kids safe as they're new to the road and new to driving? As a parent and 8 kids, as many of you probably know, you have fights in the back. What happens when you're turning around, taking your attention off the road and trying to put out a fight? This technology can be remarkable in keeping our families and our kids safe. In Wisconsin, some of you might have heard, there's a big investment from Foxconn. They're looking to work with the Wisconsin DOT to create AV-dedicated lanes to drive over 4,000 employees to their jobs at the company's plant. All of a sudden, transportation to and from work could be a perk of the job. Autonomous vehicles, they're coming. What I hope to find out today is how insurers are looking at AVs in terms of insurability. Will auto manufacturers and tech companies developing the driving systems, will they retain liability for damage? Will specialized products be developed within the industry? How will data be shared for risk assessment? I look forward to the panel's insights and thoughts on this topic. Again, this is the first time we've had a panel in our committee on this topic in ever-changing space with auto insurance. Also interested in what role you think the Congress should play. Do we have a space? If we do, what should it look like? Obviously, we don't want to crimp innovation. We want to make sure that we don't have laws that are aging as technology and is racing forward, and so I'll welcome your insights on that as well. My time is about to expire, so I now recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, the ranking member, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here to provide testimony for us. And I don't think this is something that has been scheduled too far in advance of a reality. This hearing will address the impact of autonomous vehicles on the future of insurance. This is an exciting topic, as well as the fact that we'll explore technology that very well may reshape our country and our culture. However, as with any new technology, the benefits must be carefully weighed and the relevant policies must be addressed. I happen to be one of those who believe that new technology should be scrutinized, and I think we have that responsibility. And I appreciate the fact that the chair has scheduled this hearing for that purpose. These autonomous vehicles are characterized by different levels, 1 through 5, where the car is fully automated with no role for the driver. Currently, a number of companies like Google, Apple, Uber have begun to explore manufacturing these vehicles with various levels of automation and various levels of success. I was stunned a few years ago to read that Captain Kirk and Scotty actually laid the foundation for the flip phones that we started using, and that quite often scientists will go to movie makers and ask them about the future and to create something that doesn't seem real that eventually becomes real. So I think technology is going to evolve, and it's important for the insurance sector to consider how it will be impacted. Most states require drivers to have an auto insurance that covers their private vehicle. A shift to autonomous vehicles may change the type of insurance coverage to more reliance on commercial coverage and product liability. This hearing will give us a chance to hear from the insurance sector on how they plan to address what could be a huge change in the American insurance market. I'd like to hear how affordability will be addressed in this evolving insurance market to make certain that all Americans of all economic levels will have access. And then finally, autonomous vehicles will collect huge amounts of data regarding where passengers travel. There are big questions, at least for me, that must be answered on who owns the data, what level of access should insurance companies have to it, and how will this data be protected. So thank you for being here today, and I look forward to you shedding light on all of these knotty issues that we will have to deal with. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We now welcome our panel of witnesses. First, we have Mr. David Carlson, U.S. Manufacturing and Automotive Practice Leader at Marsh McLellan. Welcome. I now want to look to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holcren, to introduce our next witness.
Thanks, Chairman. It's a privilege to be able to recognize and welcome Ryan Gammelgard from State Farm. Traveled all the way from Illinois to D.C. to testify before the subcommittee today. Chairman, as you know, State Farm is a fixture in the Illinois insurance marketplace, and actually just had the pleasure of meeting with one of my State Farm agents who serves my district, Jeff Kiker, earlier this afternoon. Ryan works as counsel in the Public Policy Resource Group of State Farm's Law Department in Bloomington, Illinois, and in this role, he's coordinated federal and state public policy positions on automated driving systems, including providing testimony at the state level. Ryan, thanks for being here. Looking forward to hearing your testimony along with the rest of our great panel today. And with that, I yield back. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. And not to be outdone by Illinois, we welcome our third witness, Sam Jerisi, the Vice President of Strategy at American Family Mutual Insurance, a great Wisconsin company. Welcome. Our fourth witness, Mr. Ian Adams, Associate Vice President of State Affairs at the R Street Institute, and Mr. Gillis, representing the Consumer Federation of America. Welcome all. The witnesses will, in a moment, be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of their written testimony. Without objection, the witnesses' written statements will be made part of the record following their oral remarks. Once the witnesses have finished presenting their testimony, each member of the subcommittee will have 5 minutes within which to ask the panel questions. Now on your table, you'll note that there are 3 lights. Green means go, yellow means you have 1 minute left, and red means your time is up. The microphones are sensitive, only when they're on though, so please make sure they're on when you're giving your statement and answering questions. With that, Mr. Carlson, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Duffy, Ranking Member Cleaver, my name is David Carlson, and I'm a Senior Vice President at Marsh & McLennan, and I lead our U.S. manufacturing and automotive industry practice. Marsh is the global leader in insurance and brokerage, and is part of Marsh & McLennan companies based in the United States. The U.S. manufacturing and automotive industry practice is a network of global employees in over 100 countries representing our clients. I am honored to participate in today's hearing, and I will use this opportunity to share initial observations on mobility transformation and focus on the impact that autonomous vehicles will have on risk management and insurance industry. The future of AV is now. We are already driving highly advanced vehicles, and by 2025, we will probably be sharing the road with autonomous vehicle technology. AV technology is creating seismic shifts in the automotive industry and insurance sector alike. The trend raises questions about how the insurance sector will incorporate AV risks into underwriting and help consumers realize the anticipated insurance safety benefits. While AV risks are a shifting landscape for underwriters, the development and solutions must be embraced to manage risk effectively. Already, underwriting and principle of personal, commercial, and trucking auto insurance is taking into consideration the safety benefits of automated driving systems. As trends in autonomous technology accelerate, manufacturers, component suppliers, and technology companies will start to assume more liability for the performance of their systems. The liability pendulum will shift from personal auto to commercial product liability or a hybrid of some form of coverage. Another likely key question involves risk management. As society becomes more dependent on various products, more liability, and it will become necessary to refocus current risk management strategies to account for that shift. Due to the anticipated positive societal and economic impacts of autonomous vehicle technology, legislators and regulators must consider establishing a regulatory framework for AV as a high priority. But government is not alone in moving with caution. The insurance industry is also in the early stages of adapting to the disruptive forces at play. As with cybersecurity and related insurance, there's value for public and private partnership to develop the technology and markets. Autonomous mobility companies are struggling to buy competitively priced insurance for auto risks. Startups and smaller companies are buying insufficient capacity in personal line marketplace, and the traditional insurance marketplace is struggling to address the needs of small and mid-sized fleets looking to enter the AV market. At Marsh & McLennan, we believe purposeful action is required. We have challenged ourselves and our insurance partners to develop scalable solutions that can address the risks that they exist today and evolve with the technology. Just the same, regulations cannot evolve into a barrier to deploying autonomous vehicle technologies. Currently, regulatory framework can limit the development of innovative insurance products when there is insufficient loss data or case law. Without flexibility, it's hard to develop solutions that address emerging technologies and changes in consumer demand. As consumers and companies no longer own assets, they rather buy them and use them as a service, insurance must respond accordingly. The ability to innovate and develop new ride-sharing insurance solutions has been a catalyst to the growth of that sector. Marsh has developed the first ride-sharing policy to adapt to the fact that people were no longer using their vehicles for 100% of personal or 100% of commercial use. The solution was pioneered leveraging the flexibility offered by the surplus lines market and had been codified by policymakers across the country. The solution provides protections for the ride-sharing public as well as the ride-share drivers. Marsh has facilitated the creation of hundreds of insurance products throughout the personal insurance marketplace that have allowed broad consumer choice to purchase the insurance that meets individual needs. We envision a similar need for the innovation across the autonomous mobility platform. Consumer preference is moving away from individual car ownership to mobility ecosystems. The effect of this is nothing short of revolutionary. To further enable the advancement of AV, policymakers should embrace the significant social and economic benefits of new technology. The insurance sector must be able to be nimble and willing to change in a way to view risks. Growing up, we were always reminded never to get into a car with a stranger. I'm willing to bet that nearly everyone in this room got into a car with a complete stranger in the last week. Who knows, in another decade, we may regularly get into a car with no driver at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Gammelgard, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duffy, Ranking Member Cleaver, and other members of the committee. My name is Ryan Gammelgard, and I am counsel in the Public Policy Resource Group of State Farm, where I work on public policy issues associated with automated vehicles. State Farm thanks you for providing this opportunity to testify today on automated vehicle technology and its impact to insurance. We have submitted written testimony to this subcommittee, which provides an overview of how we view this technology and some of our main public policy positions. For purposes of my testimony today, I'll summarize some key points. State Farm's mission is to help people manage the risks of everyday life and recover from the unexpected. State Farm has been the nation's largest auto insurer for over 75 years, and we have currently over 45 million auto policies in place. The majority of our $76 billion in revenue, annual revenue, primarily comes from auto insurance, so we do understand the potential impact that automated vehicle will have on the insurance industry. We also understand that insurance industry and State Farm are going to be looking at a number of issues to make sure that we can better protect our policyholders as they undergo this transition with automated vehicles. To this point, we want to underscore the following. To the extent that automated vehicles enhance auto and highway safety, State Farm is excited about and is supportive of these technologies. At the same time, while automated vehicles may reduce or eliminate some risks, as recent events show, there will be crashes, and new risks are likely to emerge. In order to learn more about automated vehicle technology, State Farm takes an active role in collaboration, multi-industry conversations, and research. One example is our support of ImCity at the University of Michigan. In addition to gaining access to a 32-acre test track for automated vehicles, we also work with other industry members such as GM, Ford, Intel, Verizon, and LG to identify research opportunities that need to be addressed in the automated vehicle space. In addition to that collaborative work, we also want to make sure that we understand the technology for our own purposes. So we have a vehicle research facility in Bloomington, our home office in Bloomington, Illinois, and we also conduct our own customer surveys to gauge how people are actually perceiving this technology. More information on that is in our written testimony. Bottom line, it's important for us to help prepare our 45 million auto policyholders for what the future holds. In regards to key public policy issues, I want to highlight the following. Data access. Data access is a key issue for the insurance industry. Crash-related data is essential for developing proper pricing and underwriting of these vehicles, for determining who is at fault and who is liable for crashes that do occur. And then also for the public, data access is important to determine the safety and reliability of this technology. Vehicle data access is also key for other stakeholders as well. NHTSA, in their most recent automated vehicle policy guidance, referenced the importance of data access for third parties. In the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, just within the past week, issued guidance for states outlining the importance for data access for law enforcement and other parties. Liability issues are also key for State Farm and the insurance industry. State Farm's current policy position is that existing state liability and tort laws are sufficient to address the emerging risks associated with this technology. However, we do recognize that more research and work needs to be done in that area. There is a growing perception with the move to higher levels of automation and more of a move toward commercial fleet policy, or more of a commercial fleet, there will be a shift toward more commercial and product liability issues. However, we do want to make sure that we let the system evolve before we decide to define and create new systems of liability that may not actually be to the benefit of the public. The final key point that we want to make is that as we look at legislation that is designed to help auto manufacturers, tech companies, and suppliers innovate, the insurance industry needs to be able to innovate as well. We are faced with situations where we might have to create, develop, and underwrite products that by law we are required to have match price to risk. Well, in this future state, there might not even be any data to show whether or not these vehicles are safe. And so I think we all need to work together as stakeholders in this conversation to make sure that we are allowed to innovate as well, to encourage the safe development of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jersey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Duffy, Ranking Member Cleaver, and members.
You need your microphone on?
Is it on?
Is it on? Oh, you got to pull your microphone up to you. There we go.
How's that? Chairman Duffy, Ranking Member Cleaver, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify at today's important hearing. My name is Sam Gerasi, and I'm the Vice President of Strategy at American Family Insurance. I look forward to testifying today about a topic that is of great importance to so many Americans and to American Family Insurance policyholders. American Family Insurance is the nation's 13th largest property casualty insurance group and is owned solely by our policyholders. Supporting them is our only priority in business. American Family fully supports the development of automated driving systems, or ADS, and we are among the organizations supporting ADS work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison College of Engineering and the Wisconsin Automated Vehicle Proving Grounds. This work will benefit our policyholders, our community, and our environment. The development of ADS technology may be the most consequential transportation development of our time. This new technology promises better mobility and greater safety for everyone on our roads. The development and deployment of proven, safe, autonomous vehicles will require significant technological advances, regulatory changes, and an active partnership between technology companies, vehicle makers, insurance companies, and the government. Critical issues related to passenger safety, liability, and compensation require that insurance companies are included in the regulation of autonomous vehicles. Consumers will continue to look to property casualty insurers to provide them with the protections they have come to expect as this new frontier of automotive products evolves. For decades, insurers have compiled data and analysis on human drivers and can provide actuarially valid information to measure a human driver's risk. Unfortunately, there is no comparable data or analysis regarding the risk levels of autonomous vehicles. Each auto manufacturer may have data on their vehicles, but neither regulators, agencies like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, nor the insurance industry have consistent access to that information. ADS vehicles are already producing enormous amounts of data as they are tested on public roads, and it will be important to establish access to this data for insurers. At American Family, we believe that customers should have unrestricted access to their vehicles' operating data and the ability to share that data with third parties, such as their insurers. Vehicle operating data will play an essential role in developing rates and underwriting policies. In the event of an accident, insurers will also require access to crash data. This is the vital data insurers use to determine relative liability for the inevitable crashes and to compensate crash victims. Detailed reviews of rates and coverages by state regulators requires insurers to provide extensive levels of actuarially valid data on crashes, their frequency and severity, and the type of operator that was in control of the vehicle. But we cannot provide that without data. Of course, this data would contain neither the ADS user's personally identifiable information nor any confidential business data of the vehicle manufacturer. We believe that state and federal governments should each continue to play a central role in ensuring the emergence of ADS technology while protecting consumers in the event of a crash. The federal government, through NHTSA, should continue to make determinations on vehicle performance and safety, as well as data integrity of autonomous vehicles. At the same time, states and localities should retain their traditional authority to make the determinations of the registration, licensing, and operation of vehicles. States should define and address personal liability issues in state law. Perhaps most importantly to American Family, states should retain the regulation of automobile insurance for the vehicle or operator. Unfortunately, we all know about the terrible impact of auto accidents. It doesn't have to be this way, and autonomous vehicles have the potential to make lives safer and mobility more accessible for millions of Americans. But in the meantime, we need to ensure that those involved in accidents continue to receive prompt and efficient help when they need it most. When crashes involving autonomous vehicles occur, insurers can help allocate responsibility among ADS, non-ADS, and other entities involved. Existing state liability and tort laws can evolve to address responsibility and liability in the same way that tort law has evolved with other technological and social developments. Ultimately, the insurance industry supports the development of ADS technology and should be a partner to technology companies, vehicle manufacturers, and regulators to promote safety on our roads. We look forward to continuing to be a central part of the discussion. I thank you for listening and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duffy, Ranking Member Cleaver, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Ian Adams, and I am the Associate Vice President of State Affairs at the R Street Institute. For those of you not familiar with us, we are a free market think tank that's situated here in Washington, D.C., though we do have offices throughout the country. I'm actually in from Sacramento, California. Our motto is free markets, real solutions, and that means we're often focused on issues that are of high complexity but low salience. And so in concrete terms, that's meant we've spent a lot of time looking at property and casualty insurance regulation. In fact, our signature research project on an annual basis is an insurance regulatory report card that examines the 50 states and their approaches to insurance regulation. And as a result of that research, we've come to some conclusions about the role that insurance plays as a social good. It allows consumers to evaluate, manage, and mitigate their risks. And we believe that when consumers are informed, they are best positioned to protect their interest. Risk-based rates and market competition have made U.S. roads safer places because they've allowed consumers and automakers alike to understand both operational and design choices and how they impact risk. And it's with that understanding and the prospect of lower rates and competitive advantages that safety has, until very recently, steadily improved on U.S. roads. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today, because autonomous vehicles really do present a potentially transformational moment in road safety here in the United States. Tens of thousands of people, as I'm sure you're aware, are killed on U.S. roads every year, and many more are injured. And yet the leading cause of death is not the failure of infrastructure, and it's certainly not the failure of the operation of those vehicles. It is often the choices of the operator of those vehicles. And so, because we know that the leading cause of those injuries and deaths is human operator error, AVs present us an opportunity. They can offer us a safer approach to transportation. However, even though AVs promise hitherto unimaginable safety improvements, much uncertainty remains about if, when, and how the technology will ultimately be deployed and adopted. At R Street, we believe that risk-based insurance prices can actually help resolve some of that uncertainty. And we believe that those insurance products can help hasten the pace of deployment by providing consumers not only a safety rationale, but a bottom line, a dollars and cents rationale for embracing the technology. Now, if history is any indicator, safer vehicles will, over time, mean lower costs of operation, provided consumers receive those price signals. However, today in some states, regulatory hurdles exist that undermine that process. For instance, in my home state, in California, the law currently requires consideration of rating factors, which will lead to the use of rates that are fundamentally irrational in the context of autonomous vehicles. Now, the arrival of this promising technology underscores the importance of ensuring that there is no lag between regulatory capacity and product necessity. And with that, I look forward to having the discussion that we will undertake today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Gillis. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Duffy and Ranking Member Cleaver. My name is Jack Gillis. I'm the incoming Executive Director of the Consumer Federation of America. CFA is an association of 275 state, local, and national organizations working to protect consumer interests, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We appreciate it because the subcommittee holding this hearing today, frankly, we have more questions than we have answers. By raising these questions well before the AV is introduced, you are providing the time needed to resolve the intricacies associated with ensuring these extraordinarily complex products. As the AV becomes the primary mode of transportation, we expect that insurance costs associated with personal injury will be significantly minimized. But the electronic sophistication needed to operate these vehicles could make them enormously expensive to repair. We also need to consider the role of the federal government. Right now, Congress is considering the AV START Act, a bill with some serious shortcomings that will dramatically affect auto insurance. The bill allows millions of vehicles to be exempt from safety standards, has no provisions to maintain occupant protection, no performance standards for safety features, no cybersecurity protections, and accident data is not being made available to the public, including these insurers. Without these requirements, insurers will have to guess at AV risk levels or be solely dependent on the manufacturer's performance claims. While there are many difficult questions related to insuring AVs, let me paint a picture of just one. With an autonomous vehicle, I will be able to program my vehicle to stop at my favorite coffee shop on the way to work. In my case, being from Massachusetts, I'm going to choose Dunkin' Donuts over Starbucks. Well, in the Bay State, that may be considered a moral decision. For most of us, it's clearly a matter of preference. But what about the moral decision? On that same trip to work, my AV detected a stalled semi-trailer truck in front of me and has determined with mathematical precision that there is physically no way that my vehicle will stop in time. However, it can move me out of that lane to avoid the truck. So imagine two choices. It can go left into a bike lane where a young, recently married couple expecting their first child is riding to work. Or it can go right, where on the sidewalk there's an elderly man in his early 90s hobbling along in a walker. Which way will the autonomous vehicle go? More importantly, who will program that decision? Like my choice of Dunkin' Donuts over Starbucks, will I be responsible for programming the moral decisions of the vehicle? Or will the manufacturer or the software provider? Or will the insurance company have a hand in the decision, or even underwrite policies based on which choice is embedded? More importantly, where will the liability for that decision lie? And wherever that liability lies, who will insure it, and what requirements will the insurer place on those being insured? As I mentioned, we have many more questions than answers, and I have submitted a series of questions in my written testimony, which I hope to work with this committee on over the next year or two to resolve. But there are a series of issues that mean that assessing liability will become extremely complex. Responsibility for accidents, once determined by witness and police reports, will now include sophisticated computer data. The search for true fault in accidents will require the full power of the civil justice system. The right to challenge corporate mistakes and reckless conduct in a judicial forum will continue to be essential. And what about accident repair costs? Today, the sensing devices placed in plastic bumpers have significantly increased the cost of a fender bender. What will happen when the entire vehicle is covered with sensing devices? Will the manufacturers use proprietary technology in order to prevent a competitive marketplace for repair parts? If so, insurers will be forced to increase their prices while monopolistic manufacturers line their pockets selling overpriced repair parts that we need. And what about the potential for redlining, favoring those who can afford more expensive technology and discriminating against those who cannot? For insurance to work, it must be available to all. So finally, we do have more questions than we have answers for. But thank you for beginning a process that will help ensure that the autonomous vehicle will live up to its enormous life-saving potential.
Thank you, Mr. Gillison. That was only 2 seconds over. That was fantastic. Thank you, panel, for your testimony. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. And I got to say, Mr. Gillison, it's a fascinating scenario that you lay out. We as humans might make split-second decisions in the scenario that you gave us, but this would be thought out and programmed into your vehicle, you know, what decision the car makes. And so here we're in a situation where, listen, you look at our age, our sex, our tickets, our accident record, put up a risk profile and determine rates. Well, with autonomous vehicles and the data conversation we're having, how do you assess risk? Decisions that will be made when you don't have great access to data. And Mr. Carlson, I think you were indicating that you are writing policies in this space. Was that correct?
Yes, we've worked with certain companies to collect data.
Are they providing you the data?
Yes.
Okay. And so is everyone else having trouble getting data? Or do you feel like there's not going to be cooperation from the tech industry, Mr. Gammelgard?
So from a State Farm perspective, our primary insurance business is personal line automobiles. But we have noticed a trend as we've been working on these issues over the states over the past couple years, that any attempt to get into a state law, any type of data access provision that merely seeks to sync up with existing event data recorder laws has been met with some significant resistance from some of the manufacturers and tech companies. So when I say existing laws, the EDR laws that talk about collect data 30 seconds before a crash and 5 seconds after. Things that on our face we think are pretty innocent and straightforward and just mirror what is currently the law, has been met with great resistance. And typically what we have heard in that advocacy is it's impossible to detangle the proprietary information that makes automated vehicles work from the crash-related information that people typically have had access to, whether it's insurance companies or law enforcement. And so as we look to the future state, that's a high priority for us. That's why it's one of our main public policy concerns, because we do anticipate this world where it's going to be a little bit more difficult to gain access to that information.
Mr. Jersey?
If I may, the data we're looking for here is not proprietary information from the automaker. We're looking for the same data we would ask people in today. So if you or I were in an auto crash, the police might ask us, how fast were you going? Were you stopped at the stoplight? Well, the data we're looking for would be things like just that. So how fast was the vehicle going? Was it accelerating or decelerating? Were hands on the wheel? Was it stopped when it was supposed to be? This is not proprietary data nor confidential data that's personally identifiable.
So if we look at Waymo and Uber and Lyft and Tesla and Ford and GM, Volvo, are they going to self-insure? Or how do they ask you to insure them without providing you the data? How does this gridlock break? Mr. Gammelgard? And then to Mr. Carlson, how are you getting the data? Mr. Gammelgard.
Yeah, so short answer to that is you are starting to see some collaboration in this space. Tesla, for example, is partnering with Liberty Mutual on an insurance product. And there's been some other startups that have looked to partner with tech companies and auto manufacturers for the specific purpose to get some of that information. I think the difference between what we are thinking about with our public policy considerations is how do you really move that out to address all of the public policy and all the public concerns? So to the American Family's point, when we talk about data access, it's data related to the crash, data that's not proprietary. How do we make sure that there's an ecosystem that makes that information available to the benefit, again, and not just of the insurance industry, but others as well?
Mr. Gills?
Mr. Chairman, this is really where you come in. We are going to need your help to ensure that everyone has access to this data. It is our data. We are the consumer. This is our vehicle. This is our accident. This is our experience. So that's one set of data that needs to be made publicly available. The second set of data is something the insurance industry is going to need desperately is how does all this technology work? What are the success levels of the automatic braking system created by Ford versus the one created by Tesla versus the one created by Chrysler? There are so many different variables, and data is the only way we are going to be able to assess which ones work and which ones don't.
Do you see the tech companies trying to self-insure?
We heard that originally they said they would like to self-insure.
They would.
They would. However, now we're seeing them back off a little bit and say, we're only going to insure for technological problems that can be attributed to ourselves. So now we get back to assigning liability. Was it a technological problem that created the failure, or did the driver make some sort of mistake? Or did I fail to download the software when I was notified to download new software? Or did I not know that I was supposed to download new software? So there are going to be huge liability issues associated with these AVs.
My time is up, but just one quick last question. Do you guys factor in driver assist technology on your rates?
Right now, we have a discount, but it's rather, it's really in the early stages of this. The vehicle identification number, the VIN number, has a lot of information in it around cars. So it might tell us, for example, whether you have anti-lock brakes, but it doesn't have the presence of ADS technology in there or the type of ADS technology that's in there. So for example, anti-lock brakes are anti-lock brakes. But artificial intelligence is as varied as human intelligence. And so the quality of that might vary from vehicle to vehicle.
Okay. My time has expired, and I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cleaver, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adams, I try not to be troglodytic in my views. I want to be in the 21st century. My children criticize me for only calling on this iPhone. That's a waste of money. But I'm very interested in this new technology. But frankly, I have some fears. And one of them is, well, maybe you can help give me information to calm myself down. Do you believe travel in vehicles or vehicular travel in the years to come will reduce the number of automobile deaths in the country?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, I absolutely do. This technology is going to remove the single greatest factor in the casualties we see on our roads to date. And early returns on the testing and limited deployment of this technology has been remarkably positive. And so I'm very optimistic about it. Now, I agree with you as well. It's important that we exercise caution. And so when I think about what unfolded in Tempe, and I think about the response of Governor Ducey to focus on one player in the environment, in the jurisdiction, and to tailor a solution based on their behavior, I think that's how we're going to have to move forward. We can't be putting the brakes on this technology across the board because its promise is so enormous. So to answer your question, yes, I believe that we are going to see fewer deaths on the road.
Well, if you're right, and I think you probably are, how does that, I mean, how do you figure out the insurance market? I mean, how do you price insurance in the years to come? If the number of accidents are decreasing, does that put a burden on the insurance industry to figure out new ways to assess those who use these vehicles? I mean, how are you going to survive if it's so safe that people don't even need insurance?
Sir, it's also an excellent question. It's going to be incumbent upon insurers and tech companies and just developers at large to be working together, because I think it's the case that we will continue to see crashes. Their frequency, I believe, will go down dramatically, but our early returns, our experiences with level 2 vehicles is that these systems are more expensive. And while over time the cost curve will be bent down, I believe, as a result of mass production and probably some design changes, moving some of those sensors from the front of the car to other places in the car where they are less vulnerable, you will ultimately see products that are going to be priced in such a way that there will be serious consumer side savings. And so that's going to redound to everyone's benefit.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Carlson, I talked about affordability in my opening statement. And I used the example. I moved here 14 years ago, and I stupidly didn't buy a house not too far from here because it was considered to be a bad neighborhood. Now I can't afford to live there. So, the gentrification is happening everywhere. So what happens with this new technology in terms of affordability? Is it just, will only insurance agents be able to use the technology? I mean, the billionaires that you are.
I think if anything, it's going to level the playing field. Having that much data accessible, and as we've all said, making sure that it's accessible in the right ways and the right data, utilizing it to the consumer's end. Consumer preference has changed, and we have more informed consumers than ever before. The models of buying cars in general online is changing. You can look online, and certain auto manufacturers are actually offering up insurance products beyond what the traditional was, like glass and wheels and other things. So I think it's actually going to introduce competition into the marketplace. And if it does the right thing, it should actually open the door for more people to have more affordable insurance. And it should be based on actual real-world data of your driving. So sudden starts, sudden accelerations, I'm a bad driver. People can collect that information and understand that I'm not the safest person in the world. Years ago, decades ago, that type of information wasn't going to be available to a police officer who shows up at the scene. Maybe there's some skid marks. Maybe there's somebody who was locally that saw it, that was a witness. But outside of that, you were stymied by that.
Thank you. My time is up.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holkren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, thank you all for being here. This is very interesting, and I think it is important for us to have these conversations. Mr. Gamelgard, if I can start with you, I want to begin by asking you about, and some of this has already been discussed, but maybe just get a little bit more specific, the shift in liability that is expected to occur if an individual is using an autonomous vehicle instead of operating it him or herself. According to a report from the RAND Corporation, they said, and I quote, "Liability could shift to the companies that created the software and technologies in the vehicle or the manufacturer that integrated those technologies into the car," end quote. Do you believe State Farm or other insurance providers will have to reconsider the policies that they make available? And how are you working with auto manufacturers and their technology suppliers to understand the risks or lack thereof from autonomous vehicles and how to underwrite new policies?
Yes, so definitely as the technology changes, as you see higher levels of automated vehicles on the road, that more than likely is going to necessitate a change in how policies are written and the different products and coverages that insurance companies offer. And so that is something that I know from a State Farm perspective, and I think for most other insurers, they are examining what is the potential impacts on insurance and what new products can you create. One thing that I do want to highlight that State Farm has explored, and I know some other insurance companies, and I think this might address some of Representative Cleaver's questions as well, is the introduction of personal mobility policies. So instead of insuring the vehicle, insuring the passenger of the vehicle, insuring the person every step on their journey during the day. And that can open up product opportunities for people who never would have ever thought about buying auto insurance. And so from a State Farm perspective, we do view it as what are the opportunities afforded in this space. In regards to working with other companies, I can't disclose some of the specific opportunities that we're looking at with some of the auto manufacturers and suppliers, but I can offer this up. Through our research partnerships at M-City, for example, and others, we do work closely with manufacturers and tech companies to get a better understanding of what this technology looks like, because we want to make sure that we understand the real-world implications of this technology. Also, too, going forward, I think it is important to realize that as we develop these new products, as we look for these new opportunities, there are going to be new stakeholders and new participants in this whole kind of automated vehicle ecosystem, and we're always on the lookout for who that is.
One last quick question for you, if I could. I don't know if it's quick or not, but I don't know if you or State Farm have a opinion or thought of where liability should fall if we're talking about a fully autonomous vehicle. You know, what personal liability might be there? You know, would it go to the manufacturer? Which manufacturer would it go to? Yeah, so you know, again, our main public policy position regarding liability is we do think the existing tort system is adequate to examine things as they currently exist. But I think there is a perception, again, and an understanding that as this does really go toward the operating system being in control, then does it shift to more of a product liability system? I think that's a fair assumption. At the same time, some of the things that we are working with and working against in some cases are attempts to kind of carve out liability exceptions. For example, one thing that we see quite a bit around the states are attempts to carve out liability for manufacturers or tech companies if there's been a modification to the operating system that was not approved by the manufacturer.
without really defining what modification is, that's a huge red flag for us. To help address that, we do try to work with standard-setting organizations like SAE to make sure that we do have a better understanding of how they're developing some of those standards so that we can offer our input as well. Because again, we want to make sure we know as much about this technology as possible.
That's great. In my last minute, Mr. Carlson, if I could address a couple questions to you about current underwriting practices and how these may evolve with the technologies for autonomous vehicles. Currently, how do you factor in the autonomous driving characteristics of a vehicle? And I do understand that some vehicles have things that operate more like a driver assist, such as emergency braking features, while others are very close to being fully automated. How do you all factor that in, the differences?
Well, from a risk-based perspective, looking at the data, we're going to have to take a non-traditional approach, because traditional approach will yield just that. So I think it's collecting the data in a way that looks at, what are the most at-risk opportunities in the vehicles themselves? What type of characteristics, to the chairman was talking earlier about, where is the moral compass going to happen, and where would the data be most critical? So I think using that information with some of the actuarial services as well. Again, without data and without enough loss or case law, it's very difficult for many of the colleagues on the panel to come up with something that says, hey, this is solid, we know this is going to work. So we've had to look at very different things. I would say that artificial intelligence is going to come into play here at some point in time. With the millions of data points are going to be collected, you're going to need very powerful tools, analytical tools, algorithms that are going to be able to come up with something, and then really smart people that are going to say, this is where we should be now, and we're going to probably change 5, 10 years. It's just going to continuously changing and improve on that as far as getting the data on the car and the risk.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for calling today's hearing. Autonomous vehicles represent a great opportunity for our economy, and their potential impact on automotive safety could be profound. KPMG estimates that autonomous vehicles could help reduce accident frequency by 80% by 2040. Consider that nearly 40,000 people died in motor vehicle crashes in 2016 alone. That means that this technology could save thousands of lives every single year. I am proud that much of the research in autonomous vehicles is being conducted in Pittsburgh by companies like Uber and Argo. I actually had the opportunity to take my first ride in one of these vehicles through the streets of Pittsburgh last summer. I can see the promise of autonomous vehicles, and I want to ensure that Washington and state-level regulators create a fertile environment for the further development of this industry. I'm looking forward to hearing from today's witnesses and what you've been testifying about. First, I want to talk to Mr. Gammelgard or Mr. Garassi. While this industry is new in developing products and testing them on city streets, I'm kind of wondering how they're looking at the insurance aspects of it. Have you or others worked with the technology companies or auto manufacturers to develop insurance products?
Thank you for the question. So again, without being able to speak to specific work that we may be exploring, I can say that State Farm does have a long history and relationship with a number of different auto manufacturers in relation to examining data that we have access to and that we're analyzing as we're adjusting claims. And so we do expect that relationship to continue going forward. I do think, from my own observation, having worked on this for the past few years, is if you go back 2 or 3 years ago, there was this perception amongst those in the auto industry that self-insurance might be the way forward. I think that has changed a little bit. It seems to me, at least, that there's a little bit more willingness to explore opportunities, and I think you are seeing that, for example, in Liberty Mutual partnering with Tesla. I'd mentioned that earlier, but they were very, very kind of public about that partnership. And I think it is fair to say that in this world, when you look at all the different stakeholders that are in the mix here, it's only natural that the insurance industry would start to be brought more into that conversation.
Mr. Grassi?
Yeah, and American Family also has a history of partnerships with different groups, but as an industry, we do as well with the automakers. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has a long history of working with auto manufacturers. The companies that partner with them often do crash test data, so you've seen the crash test dummies. A lot of that takes place with IHS.
If we could talk a little bit about the state aspect of it. Mr. Adams, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of an accommodating regulatory framework that enables flexible product development, deployment, and pricing. Can you elaborate on what states are doing to allow for more flexibility?
Thank you for the question. It's a mixed bag, and that's part of the challenge with the laboratory of democracy approach, that you've got some states that have incumbent systems where you have to get prior approval for rates, and in some of those states, the timelines are really quite dramatic. And then you've got other states that require you to take factors like years driving, right? Take driver experience into account. And as we see these new technologies come onto the scene and be deployed in larger numbers, what we're going to be observing is scenarios where we're asking how effective a driver has been over the last several years, and that data really doesn't have a lot to do with the actual risk being presented. And so it is something that the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, I know that this is on their radar. The National Council of Insurance Legislators, I know that this is something that they're looking at. But I think that the immediate answer to your question is we haven't seen any rapid regulatory changes being contemplated across the country yet.
If I may?
Yeah.
I think it's accretive to this conversation that several states have put arbitrary $5 million liability limits out, and part of our solution was to actually build an insurance facility with several insurance companies that met a primary and a secondary layer that allowed risk to be managed as a business advantage and not a barrier. And so I think that's part of what has to occur, is the ability and the willingness to kind of create this sandbox where we can all get in and say, okay, what must you have and what must the customer or the company testing these vehicles in order to meet and get some progress here, but in a very methodical and very thoughtful way.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to all of our witnesses. I look forward to hearing your thoughts this afternoon on what's an interesting and very important topic, and even more so as in the future. In the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, or NAMIC's, recently released a policy paper on AVs. The author, Tom Carroll, points out that the single most important reason to support the development of AVs is the potential to enhance safety and to save lives. Carroll notes that the enhanced safety must always be the primary focus of AV development, and this brings a question to mind. How safe must an AV be before it is allowed on the roads? Mr. Gerasi and then Mr. Gamelgard, if you could weigh in on that.
Sure. To be clear, the technology is really in version 1.0. They're still really evolving. It's in the testing phase. The relevant hurdle, if you will, is making the technology safer than a human driver. Right now, there's 40,000 deaths per year because humans aren't perfect drivers as well. What we really need to, though, is to get the data to understand how safe those vehicles are, which ones are at what level of safety.
Sure. If you could pull that microphone up just a little bit more. Thanks.
Sure. The Senate START AV bill had a good amendment, the Inhofe Amendment, that would establish the Data Access Advisory Committee, wherein the manufacturers and insurance companies and other interested parties would work together to determine access and ownership of data. With that help from Congress, that could assist in establishing some of that data that we need.
Good, thank you. Mr. Gamelgard.
Yeah, and to echo those comments, and not to sound like a broken record, but data access is key, and we can't stress that enough. And so when we look at current, I'll just call them semi-automotive components that are on vehicles, Insurance Institute for Highway Safety does a number of testing, so does State Farm, where we can actually get in and look to see how these components are working on a vehicle, and that's led to some pretty good outcomes, right? We're seeing some real-world information that shows that some of these components actually work as advertised, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and everything really is contingent on being able to analyze that data. State Farm, much like others in American Family, are supportive of the amendment in the AV START Act that talks about that data advisory committee. The important thing there is I think it talks about a multi-stakeholder approach. So it's the insurance industry, it's law enforcement, it's other organizations or other parties that are looking for the best way to go forward on this while understanding that data access is a key issue. And the final thing I'll point out is as NHTSA is updating its automated vehicle policy guidance, we have filed comments with NHTSA, and I know Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has as well, that starts to outline what different data variables do we think are relevant in this future state. And so we've definitely evolved from this position of just broad general data access to starting to get more refined so that we can respect that interplay between proprietary information and what is needed to appropriately determine whether or not this technology works.
Good, thank you for that. So NAMIC's, and this is also for you too as well, so NAMIC's policy paper also points out that critical issues related to passenger safety, liability, and compensation after a crash require that insurance companies are included in the development of AVs. There have been legislative proposals that would preempt state and local authorities from regulating and enforcing performance standards for AVs. But in terms of insurance, do you believe that the states should maintain their traditional authority in regulating matters of liability and insurance surrounding these AVs? I mean, there was a little bit of thoughts on that earlier, but I'd appreciate your comments on it.
At American Family, and I think this is true at State Farm as well, is yes, we believe that states should retain their traditional role. It's a little bit of a case of if it's not broke, don't fix it. And particularly as autonomous vehicles come out, they work better and in different environments. So in dry, flat environments, they tend to work best. And so you might want different rules there. So we really do believe that now and in the future, you're going to want to see states controlling this.
Yes, and from a State Farm perspective, and we are also involved with the NAMIC AV Council that has helped craft those policy positions, very supportive of the states continuing to be able to regulate the business of insurance, something that's very important to us, and also something that I would argue in this state, as the technology is developed, is actually much needed.
Very good. Thank you both for your time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 5 minutes.
As we move to self-driving vehicles, I hope things get safer. That is a good thing for society as a whole. It will, of course, affect insurance companies, attorneys, body shops, et cetera. There will still be some accidents, and a question will arise as to whether we focus on a product liability model or on a driving negligence model, and this will come up most in the area of what I would call failure to drive defensively. If I'm in the right and I drive through and some idiot hits me, the fact that if I was a better driver, might have been able to avoid the accident notwithstanding his mistake, well, I was in the vehicle code, I have no liability. On the other hand, in the product liability area, if you could design a car that can avoid an accident even if an idiot does this or that, even if a road has this or that flaw, and you fail to do so, the fact that the vehicle operates consistent with the vehicle code may not be sufficient. And it will be interesting to see how the law develops, and it will develop through case law, and it will be unknown what the situation is. It would be better if we as a country could wrestle with these issues while the engineers are developing autonomous vehicles and have a national standard, and maybe you folks can give us some suggestions. The idea that we could keep up with the engineers here in Congress, and I don't know if we could do it, but at least we'd have a try if you guys. Okay, Mr. Gillies, we're approaching a world where it may not be inconceivable that cars won't be owned by individuals. The ride-hailing services will control the market. And When Uber sends you the picture of the driver who's driving the car that picks you up, it may just be a round circle, or maybe it will, in any case, not a human being driving that car. And obviously, large companies would have more leverage in negotiating with insurance companies. Could you discuss how the dominance of a few large insurance purchasers instead of tens of millions of insurance purchasers would affect the industry?
Well, the good news is that many of the companies right here are financially dependent on those hundreds and thousands of consumers that need automobile insurance. We would not be able to own automobiles if there was no insurance. We just can't, we simply can't absorb the risk. So as consumers move into not owning vehicles, they will not need personal auto insurance. What they will move into is what we've heard a little bit about today, is personal mobility insurance. So they will likely have to buy some type of insurance that covers themselves when, rather than get into a battle with one of the big technology companies who purportedly is going to take on the liability for a failure, but still there has to be fault.
Well,
fault will have to be determined.
Right now, there are plenty of people with absolutely no insurance and absolutely no car. They call Uber, and nobody is selling them a policy, a Uber user policy. I wonder whether if I give up my car and start hailing the Uber that has no driver, whether I will need any kind of insurance at all. Mr. Gamelgard, there are two types of autonomous vehicles: those where there's a driver in them now, and then the autonomous vehicle assists, but the human has some responsibility, versus situations where there is no human in the driver's seat, just in the back seat. Can you expand on the insurance implications of fully self-driving cars as opposed to self-driving cars where you're behind the wheel and you're supposed to take the wheel when necessary?
Yes, and I think, currently on the road you have 0 to 2 levels, 0 through 2 vehicles, and so we definitely insure some of those on the higher end of that scale. And then the big question will be that transition to level 4 and 5, where theoretically you don't have to have a driver. There might not even be a steering wheel in the vehicle. I think the challenge is going to be in that level 3 space, and if you look at some of the research that has occurred, it's this big question about whether or not a vehicle that has an operating system driving the car can push control back to a human operator if there's a safety critical situation. How long does a person need to get kind of reacclimated into driving a vehicle? I think those are going to be the challenges that the insurance industry faces as you see that transition from level 2 into level 4. And those are the things that we need additional research on. We need additional data access in order to be able to better judge how do we create and craft policies to help cover those risks.
I wonder if I could sneak in one more. Okay. Mr. Gerasi, the autonomous vehicles are not required to submit safety assessment letters to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration before they're deployed for testing. At least that's what I'm told. What steps are you taking to validate the safety of autonomous vehicles before they go out on the road?
Well, we need to get data in order to understand the safety of those vehicles. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, in order to understand the safety of the autonomous vehicles, we really need to get the data that would underlie the performance of those cars. So, what is their record? What is their safety record? What's their performance? And getting access to that data would be foundational in order to help assess the risk that those cars pose or don't pose.
Maybe Congress ought to help with requirements that you get that data. And
you could help with that, yes.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, the chair of the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions, Mr. Lukemeyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, gentlemen. I apologize for stepping out a while ago, but if I ask some questions here that are duplicative, please say so, and I will move on. Just kind of curious, you know, we're talking about the liability exposure of the company. How does this work whenever you have an autonomous vehicle, it's driving down the street, a pedestrian steps out in front of them, and there's a car coming the other way. Does the car hit the pedestrian? Or does the car hit the other car coming on? And who decides which decision is the right one and minimizes liability? How's that work? There's 5 of you. Anybody want to take a track?
Yeah. Without divulging client names, many of the conversations have been around the morality of your question, and it's a great question. The ultimate is the responsibility to the current passenger. As I understand it now, is right now we're going to protect the passenger. The ability for the car to...
So when you say protect the passenger, you're saying that the car will make a decision on which one is going to be least harmful to the passenger. So if it's to hit the pedestrian versus the other car, they will hit the pedestrian.
If it can make that decision, I can't give you an answer on whether it's going to hit a tree, a pedestrian, a dog, or a squirrel. What they're trying to do is utilize vehicle-to-vehicle data, vehicle-to-environment, or what they call V2X. And that technology is going to take time to develop because not everything is interconnected. And so right now you have vehicles out there that can't communicate with other vehicles that are 30 yards ahead, 40 yards ahead. Vehicle-to-X environment would be a situation where the vehicle is actually able to collect data off of infrastructure and other places. That should help with the morality issue where the vehicle is able to start making decisions and discriminate, if you will, between what is a object and something that can't be. I know it's a great question that many companies are trying to solve for because that morality issue is something that, from a risk management perspective, they do want to address to ensure that the vehicles are as safe as possible, but then also pedestrians and others. I would add that I ride a road bike, and I would love for them to know that I am an object that shouldn't be hit while I'm riding on the road. And earlier, one of the conversation was about, you know, how does this make a decision? What if a young athlete or a driver is driving along, makes a decision to kind of scoot over and scare me off the road? That could be really bad for me. An autonomous vehicle won't make that kind of decision. So.
Okay, thank you. You know, you guys I got into some of the discussion here, I listened to some of the discussion with regards to state laws being, you know, we want to make sure the states continue to enforce the insurance laws. Is there an effort to work with the different state jurisdictions and say, hey, you know, we've got this going on, can you give us some direction? They have some ideas? Do they have any studies going on to help them with how they need to manage the oversight of this at all, or is it kind of wait until you guys do something and then come back and see once if it works?
So from a State Farm perspective, I know we've been very engaged with AMVA, American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, basically all the State Department of Transportations and administrators, and have been able to participate in a number of different events that they've had and spoken and provided input. And they recently, just in the past week, issued some guidance and guidelines for what they think the state should follow. Also, we've been very engaged with the National Conference of State Legislatures. So that's basically a nonprofit that helps collect different information that then state policymakers can look at and review.
Are they helping facilitate between the manufacturer and insurance companies to be able to, so you guys get the information you need to be able to make good decisions on insurance?
They're helping facilitate those conversations to the degree that they can.
Yeah.
Right. And so when they do have meetings and when they have different private partnerships, they are trying to make sure to reach out to a number of different stakeholders. So not just the manufacturers and insurance industry, but other people and other groups that may be impacted by this technology as well. So those are the attempts that are going on that come most to mind. At the same time, I think there probably needs to be continued work to make sure that everybody tries to work together going forward on these issues.
Very good. I see my time's about to expire. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record this article by Consumer Watchdog entitled Safe Driving Vehicles, a Threat to Consumers.
Without objection. If I could take the liberty to ask two questions. Cyber hacking on these autonomous vehicles, concerns, threats? Mr. Carlson?
Yes, I think it's a great question. I think it got a lot of fanfare when people were able to hack into a vehicle, and without knowing all the knowledge, they had to remove the entire dash. They had to have a laptop. I mean, this was not just, and then the second time they did it, they got a little smarter. My position and the thought is getting into that vehicle is maybe not the end game for a malicious person. The end game may be getting into the financial services group of one of these large lenders where you're buying your cars. Personally identifiable information, I'm pretty sure nobody really cares about me, but I'm pretty sure that they would love to get into one of the large OEMs, global networks, and make some type of deleterious attack and do something that would stop production, industrial control systems, something of that nature. It's a possibility, and it's not outside the realm.
Anyone else?
We think it's a very serious problem, and it is a very personally serious problem. There is absolutely no question. We have seen attacks on schools. We've seen attacks on shopping centers. It's inevitable that the vehicle will be attacked, and that's why we are begging Congress to set up cybersecurity requirements as part of the AV START Act. Very, very important.
Anyone else?
At American Family, we believe that's the federal government's role to help with that. The manufacturers are taking steps, so there's only periodic uploads and downloads of data, so that someone who is of malicious intent can't always access a vehicle, only at certain brief periods of time. But it would be good if Congress could include that in the legislation.
Sir, if I may, I think it's important to recognize that the manufacturers are actually doing a fair amount in this space. They realize that one of the most important elements for the adoption of this technology is the trust of the consumer. And so they have a clearinghouse of information for vulnerabilities. They work together. This is something that is at top of their mind.
Okay. I want to thank the panel for their testimony today. I would just ask that you continue to advise and provide your insights and intelligence on what we in Congress should be doing, specifically on our subcommittee and committee as a whole. We look forward to your wisdom and continued dialogue. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions to the chair, which will be forwarded to our witnesses. If we have some of those, we'd ask that you promptly respond to those questions that may come from this subcommittee. Without objection, the hearing is now adjourned.